Welcome to the Physician's Guide to Financial Wellness, the podcast dedicated to helping physicians in Michigan turn their professional success into financial success while enjoying life along the way. And now, here are your hosts, Andrew Mushbaugh and Trent DeBruin.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Physician's Guide to Financial Wellness. This is Andrew Mushbaugh, and I'm joined, as always, by my co-host, Trent DeBruin. And today we're going to talk about a topic most people, including the government, don't like to address, and that's budgeting. And before we lose any listeners, hopefully the title gave away the punchline, but we're not going to talk through how to track every last dollar or say that you can't meet your goals by going to Starbucks. Instead, we're going to go through a different approach that gets the same goal, and we call this the reverse budget.
Yeah, and I'm sure for those of you who have listened to other episodes of the podcast, you won't be surprised that we aren't winning any awards for creativity with how we name our different episodes.
Yeah, fortunately, we make zero promises about our creativity.
Yeah, well, at least we own it.
Well, knowing we aren't up for any creativity awards, we'll stick with the reverse budget, at least for the time being. And like I mentioned, whether it's following a strict budget or walking through our approach to the reverse budgeting, the end goal is still the same, which, looking at it from the bigger picture, it's about not living beyond your means or jeopardizing your options in the future. So we'll walk through, number one, what reverse budgeting is and why we prefer the approach. Number two, what reverse budgeting looks like in practice. And number three, how to check in and make adjustments over time. So Trent, why don't you kick us off by walking through what reverse budgeting is?
Sure, but before I do that, we should probably add the caveat that there's nothing wrong with budgeting in the traditional sense, and it certainly can work for some people. But we know that's the minority of people who enjoy following or tracking a strict budget. And even for those who do like to track a strict budget, there's still benefits to be had from adding in this reverse budget approach. In simple terms, a reverse budget shifts the focus from looking at what you're spending to what you're saving, hence the creative name of reverse budgeting. And when looking at saving first, this entails setting up savings targets based on meeting future goals you have. Retirement, a down payment for a house, college savings for your kids, etc. By hitting those savings targets and checking in each year, you'll know that you're on track to meet your future goals. And if you know you're on track to meet your future savings targets, you can then have the flexibility of choosing what to do with whatever's left over on a monthly or a yearly basis. So you effectively back into a budget for yourself, which means you can then have the flexibility of choosing what to do with whatever remains guilt-free. Which is important to emphasize the guilt-free part of the equation, since often people will feel like they should be saving more or maybe overspending, but spending and saving is all relative, and without context, it can be hard to really know. However, if you're on track to meet all your future goals, then we encourage people to feel comfortable enjoying things along the way by spending more, if they want to, in a guilt-free manner. Now, with the added flexibility after knowing you're on track with your savings targets, it could mean you can spend a little more guilt-free by going on a trip, making a home renovation, or having a few extra date nights. But you can also choose to save a little more to get even further ahead on your goals and give you even more flexibility with your options in the future. Typically, it ends up being a combination of the two, where people can have the confidence to spend a little more, but also tend to save a little more too, to add more flexibility down the road. There's no right or wrong answer here because everyone has different goals they're saving for, along with a different balance of how they like to spend money throughout their lives. Now, that's looking at the rosier picture of being on track with your savings targets and having money left over. But if you go through this exercise and realize that you aren't on track with hitting your savings targets, you'll still have context needed to make an intentional decision of what to do. If you realize you're not hitting your savings targets, you can then look at where your options are, which are either 1. Adjust your goals, retire later, spend less in retirement, pay less toward college, etc. Or 2, increase how much you can save by lowering your expenses or increasing your income. There's no magic solution available, and by breaking down your decisions following this approach, you'll be able to make an intentional decision on what works best for you and your family. As you can see, whether you're on track or not with your savings targets, the benefit of reverse budgeting is helping you see what your decisions today mean for the future. It gives you a sense of control because you'll have clarity knowing the impact of your decisions. From there, whether you're on track or not, you can make spending and saving choices based on what's most important to you.
Yeah, and this is a constant theme from us, but reverse budgeting is just another way to help people have peace of mind by striking the right balance of enjoying their money today while also saving enough for the future in whatever way works best for them. So now that we talked through what reverse budgeting entails from a higher level, we'll walk through what it actually looks like in practice and how you can implement it yourself through a 4-step process. The first step is reviewing your goals and having a rough idea of what's most important to you. For example, how important is it to fully fund college costs for your kids? Do you want to retire or be financially independent at age 50? Or is it hard to see you retiring before age 65? Are you in your forever house or not? These goals don't have to be set in stone or done in a precise manner, but it's always the starting point because if you don't have at least an idea of what you're aiming for, then it's impossible to measure whether you're on track or not over time. Not taking this first step is typically where the most stress comes into play. The reason for that is because if you don't have at least a rough plan of where you want to be in the future, you don't have clarity around if you're saving enough and on track, or if you're potentially oversaving at the expense of enjoying life along the way. This can often lead to a disconnect of blindly thinking that we are overspending or undersaving without any context, and that uncertainty can cause a lot of unnecessary stress. So after you at least write out what you're saving for and prioritize out what's most important to you, step 2 is assessing where you're at today, both in terms of what you've saved up for your various goals, but also what your current savings are towards each of those goals. This entails looking at your most recent account balances, your 401ks, 403bs, IRAs, 529 plans for college, and also what you are saving to each of those goals. When reviewing what you are saving, it's important to not only consider what you are saving, but also factor in any contributions or benefits from your employer. Things like U of M's 10% matching contribution to your 401a or an $800 HSA employer contribution. After you understand where you are at today and how much you are saving your various goals, step 3 is assessing whether or not you're on track with meeting your goals based on your current path. Now, this involves projecting out into the future and making assumptions. So while we use financial software that has factors like inflation, taxes, various return assumptions, we know not everyone has access to the same tools. There are some free tools and calculators available online that can at least give you a ballpark estimate. And when it comes to retirement projections, we've also written a blog post on how you can do some back-of-the-napkin math to see when you could project to be financially independent and the portfolio size you need to get there. While it's ideal to get as accurate of a picture as you can to have that full peace of mind that you are on track with your goals and can trust your assumptions, we're big fans of making sure that you take any small step that can help you get a little bit closer, which even if you're just doing a rough calculation or using a free online tool, it's better than nothing. And after you run the projections for your various goals like college planning and retirement, you now have a baseline starting point to assess progress and will have clarity around whether or not you're on track to meet your goals. And when looking at your projections, there are only 2 options. Are you on track or not? And you can fall on any end of the spectrum from being really far behind or really far ahead on meeting your goals. This is where step 4 comes into play, which is understanding your trade-offs. If you run these projections and realize you are behind schedule, like Trent mentioned, you can either 1, save more to meet those goals by either increasing your income or lowering your spending, or 2, decide to change your goals. For example, retire 1 to 2 years later, spend less in retirement, or have your kids pay for some of college. A constant theme from us, which really could be a drinking game for anyone listening, is the idea that there is not one right answer. Everyone is different and values different things differently. For some, retirement at 50 may be non-negotiable. For others, they'd rather take an extra couple of vacations with their kids, knowing that they'd have to work a little bit longer. The goal of step 4 is understand the trade-offs involved so that you can make an intentional decision on what's most important to you and adjusting, or not, what you're currently doing today. In this step, after you decide on what's most important to you, you'll have a rough idea of what you need to save in order to meet the various goals you have based on the time horizon for each. The end result is you having various savings targets for each of the goals you've decided on. For example, you may realize you need to save $10,000 per kid per year for college costs and $60,000 per year for retirement. These are the savings targets you need to hit and is the end goal of the reverse budget. Once you have your savings targets, we always recommend automating wherever possible. That could be automatic deductions from your paycheck for retirement, monthly transfers from your bank account to a 529 plan, or anything else that you can automate. And knowing what your savings targets are and that you're doing everything you need to meet your future goals, you effectively eliminate the need to track your monthly budget or expenses and can feel free to spend whatever's left over guilt-free. Instead, you can focus on the overall trend over time, which we'll touch on in a second, to then make adjustments if needed over time. Yeah, and I guess we should probably add in the obvious caveat that you don't need to budget as long as you don't spend more than what you have in your bank account.
Yeah, that's a good disclaimer to add.
Yeah, it felt like I had to add that in. So what I just went through there is how to set up your initial reverse budget. And while the goal of reverse budgeting is to help you spend less time worrying about the day-to-day spending, it's still important to review this over time and make adjustments as needed.
Exactly. Well, we like to minimize the overthinking that can go into managing your finances. You still need to at least check in periodically. And the reason you need to check in every once in a while, which we'd recommend at least once a year, is that you want to revisit your progress toward the various goals, along with whether any of your goals have changed, to see if you need to make any adjustments. And 2, you also want to check in to see how your month-to-month lifestyle is and where your bank account balances are at. If, when you check in, you realize that you're still on track to meet your goals based on your savings target, you're doing everything you want to on a day-to-day or month-to-month basis in terms of enjoying life along the way, and your bank account balances continue to go up, then you'll want to make a decision of what to do with the extra cash you've saved up. You may decide to spend more where you'd like to take a trip, do a home renovation, or go out to eat a few more times. Or you may decide that you want to save a little more toward your goals for added flexibility down the road. By doing this, you'll just put yourself further ahead in terms of meeting those goals, which then means you could spend more in retirement, give more to charity, or just have the peace of mind that work is optional by being financially independent. Said differently, you could put yourself in a better position to work because you want to and not because you need to, or to fund your current or future lifestyle. And this doesn't have to be an exhaustive review process, but there's so many moving variables and things change in your life, so by checking in, you can have that peace of mind knowing that you're doing everything required to meet your future goals and can enjoy things along the way in whatever combination works best for you and your family. And as part of this review, since most people couldn't rattle off how much they spend each month or each year just off the top of their head, it's worth getting at least a rough estimate of what you spend. And you could certainly use a budgeting app like Mint.com, and even some banks are now offering tools to track spending, but there's an easier way if that's not something you're interested in doing. It involves looking at your tax return, which, assuming you're doing everything above the board, never lies, and it tells you what you made and what you paid in taxes. So whatever's left over, if you didn't save it, you spent it. And this can often be eye-opening, and you may realize how those one-off expenses tend to be more consistent than you thought when looking at your overall spending. So to walk through what you need to estimate your spending based on your tax return, you need to know 3 things. What your income from work is, which is reported on your 1040 tax return. What you paid in taxes, which is on page 2 of your 1040 tax return, both the federal and state. And 3, what you saved, either through cash accumulating in your checkings and savings accounts or other savings outside of your employer retirement plans, such as 529 plan contributions, a backdoor Roth IRA, or a taxable brokerage account. From there, you can simply take your income, less taxes, less what you saved. For example, let's say your income shows $250,000, you paid $60,000 in federal and state taxes, and you saved $40,000. Well, that means you spent $150,000. And like we said, the tax return doesn't lie, so if you didn't save it, you spent it in some form of another. So doing this quick check-in can help you to at least have a ballpark idea of what your spending is, to make sure you have an accurate picture of what you'll spend in retirement and allow you to continue not having to worry about following a strict budget. And having said this, one important thing to note about the spending is how it changes over time. You may have debt payments that won't be there in retirement, like student loans or a mortgage, costs for your kids, daycare, nanny, healthcare costs, or other things. So it's a useful number, but it'll change in retirement, which is why you want to check in periodically.
Yeah, it's amazing how much costs go down once kids are off the, quote unquote scholarship.
Yeah, that's so true. And unfortunately for both of us, at least financially, we're pretty far away from that being the case.
Yeah. Well, hopefully that was a helpful discussion and can lift a little burden off people who dislike following a strict budget, at least like we do. And when it comes to managing your finances, we can't emphasize it enough that you don't get extra credit for doing things you don't like just because you think you should. The goal is to figure out what works for you and tweak your thought process or use other tools, like following a reverse budget, to make sure you're still being smart about the way you manage your finances over time. And so to give a quick recap of what we went through, number 1, you want to understand that a reverse budget is simply shifting the focus of tracking your monthly expenses to hitting specific saving targets. Number 2, implementing the reverse budget can be done following the 4-step process we outlined, which includes listing out at least a rough idea of your goals, looking at your current path of how much you have saved up already and how much you save ongoing, assessing where what you're currently doing puts you relative to meeting some of those future goals, and finally, ultimately deciding on what trade-offs you're comfortable with and setting up intentional saving targets that work for you. And the last point, number 3, is a reminder to check back in and review your progress to confirm your reverse budget and savings targets still work for you over time. Well, thanks everyone for joining us for another episode of the show. If you want to check out the show notes, you can find them at mdwmllc.com/podcast. As always, you're also welcome to email us at info@mdwmllc.com. If you have any thoughts or questions that you have, take care everyone, and we'll look forward to talking to you again soon.
Want even more ideas, tools, and resources on how to make smart financial decisions? Check out the resources section of MD Wealth Management's website at mdwmllc.com, where you'll find additional knowledge and insight from Michigan physicians, including a blog, ebook, and one-page guides. While there, you can also schedule a 15-minute conversation with Andrew and Trent to learn more about what it means to work with the firm and how they serve physicians. If you've enjoyed the content, please leave a review on iTunes and share with your friends and colleagues. Thanks so much for listening. Andrew Mushbaugh and Trent DeBruin are certified financial planners, principals, and co-founders of MD Wealth Management, a registered investment advisory firm in the state of Michigan. All opinions shared in the show are for general information and are not intended to provide specific advice or recommendations for any individual. All performance referenced is historical and no guarantee of future returns. Please consult with your legal advisor, your tax advisor, or your financial advisor before making any decisions.